All right, welcome back to Johnny Says e-bike channel. I'm Jersey John, and today I want to answer the most common question I get, especially when I'm out riding the bike. People will come up to me and they'll be like, "What the heck is an e-bike? What is that?" Right? So I made these other videos, and after looking at them, I'm thinking, how many people know what a 750-watt rear hub motor is? Right? So I thought, let me just break it down like I would if I saw you on the street or in the park on the trails and you said, "Hey, what's an e-bike?" Okay. So I want to keep it simple and brief, give you an overall view, and then at least you know what to look up, right? Something piques your curiosity, you'll look at, hey, what's a rear hub, what's a mid-drive motor, whatever. So I'm going to kind of break it up into categories to make it easier, or you could just speed through or go back to the category that you really had an interest in. Okay, so check this out, break it down. What the heck's an e-bike? So here I am shooting this video inside my shop. If you saw my trailer, you know I like to shoot my videos out in the field, in the mountains, and the lakes, and the beach, and all that. But right now we're getting some heavy rains, climate change, or winter, call it whatever you want. So I have to shoot this inside. Okay, so I'm going to give you the basics. I'm going to break it down. Remember, I'm not going to get technical. I'm not going to just like nitpick every category because every category of bike has subcategories and they have subcategories, right? So again, I want to keep this simple. All right, so the way I see it anyway, for what Johnny says, you got three types. You got your commuter bikes, which are basically like your the Schwinn bike that you grew up with, right? Those are commuters. It's a basic bike, skinny tires. They don't have as much power, and they're great bikes. We're going to cover them as well. Then you have your folding bikes. We have bikes that fold in half, and this way you could stick them in your car trunk, your van, your RV. That's another category, and usually they're 20-inch tires, fat tires, okay? And then we have the e-mountain bikes, which is what I'm going to focus on predominantly, and at least in the first probably 5, 6 videos, okay? Like this one behind me. This is an e-mountain bike. So an e-bike is an electrical bike. It's a bicycle, right? It looks just like a regular bike, but it has a motor, it has a battery, and it just helps you move along, okay? So commuter, e-mountain bike, and folders, three categories, okay? Then we have what we used to call, or some people still do, like in China, there's the men's bike and the women's bike. Okay. Now in the States, we call it the step over, the men's, or the step through, which is the ladies' bike, right? So now we call it step over, step through. You either have a bar on top that you have to put your leg over, or there's no bar up here and it's down here. And I'll tell you, they're great for older people. They're great for somebody who had like a knee surgery or a hip surgery. So, swinging your leg over these bikes isn't as easy as you might think. All right, some of them are pretty big. So step through, step over, men's, ladies, call it what you like. Then we also have the hub motors, which I like to think of as like an automatic transmission. You hit the throttle, you just go. Okay. Then we have mid-drive motors. Now this is a mid-drive. The motor is in the middle of this bike. It's not in the back wheel. It's not in the front wheel. It's in the middle. These bikes I wouldn't recommend for beginners because it's like driving a manual transmission. It's like a stick shift, okay? You have to use your Shimano gears basically as a transmission. So there's a lot more work involved, but what you get out of the bike as far as like hill climbing and everything is well worth it to me, but it's definitely not something I would recommend for a beginner. All right, so those are the categories of bikes as far as types of bikes. And now we'll talk about the operating systems. Check it out. Let's talk about the operating system. So we know we have a bike and it has a motor. How does it deliver power? So you'll either have a throttle or no throttle. If you have no throttle, you're dependent upon pedal assist, which means as you start to pedal the bike, at some point, the motor will get power and deliver that power, and it will help you along your way. Now, if you have a throttle, it's basically on-demand power. It's like hitting the gas pedal in your car. You hit the throttle and you're going to go. Now, throttle, it's either dependent or independent of the pedal assist level. So if it's independent of pedal assist level, you could be in 0 pedal assist, hit the throttle, and that bike's going to go. If it's dependent upon pedal assist level, you have to be in one of those levels for the throttle to work. So if you're in 0 and you hit the throttle, you're not going anywhere, which sometimes is a good thing. Okay, so and now if you have a throttle, sometimes it's dependent upon what pedal assist level you're in. If you're in pedal assist level 1, it'll deliver so much power. If you want max power, you got to kick it up to the top pedal assist level. So at this point, you're probably wondering, what the heck's pedal assist, right? Just like it sounds, the motor delivers power based upon your pedaling. It's either a torque sensor or a cadence sensor, and that's more the technical stuff. I'm not going to get into that, but basically, as you pedal the bike, you get assistance, okay? And that assistance is based upon what level you're in. Some bikes are pedal assist levels 1 to 3, 1 to 5, 1 to 9. It varies bike by bike. 1 to 5 is pretty good because it gives you a better degree of levels of speed. And if you're newer to this, you're going to want that, okay? So on a lot of these 750 watt e-mountain bikes, they go about 24 miles an hour, and each pedal assist level will give you about 5 miles per hour. So if you're in pedal assist 1, you'll go about 5, 2, you'll go to 10, 3, you'll go to 15, and so on. All right, so pedal assist helps you move along based upon pedaling of the bike and what level you have it in. The higher the level, the faster you're going to go. All right, so let's talk about power next. Now we know the bike has power. Where does it come from and what does it do? So basically, the battery sends an electrical current to your controller. Your controller will send a current in the form of watts to your motor, whether it's in the rear or whether it's in the middle of the bike, okay? So you have two types of motors. You have a mid-drive, which this bike has, like it says, to the middle of the bike, okay? Then you have a hub motor, which is the hub of the wheel, whether it's the front or the back. The hub motors are the center of the wheel, and the motor turns, which in turn turns the wheel, okay? So mid-drive, hub motor, okay? And remember, the hub motor is like an automatic. The mid-drive is like a standard transmission. You have a lot more work. You have to shift the gears to use it properly. So now let's look at the hub motors. You have two types. You have geared and you have gearless. The geared motors, smaller, more compact, and deliver more torque than a gearless motor. The gearless motors, they're also called direct drive motors. They're a lot bigger. They take up a lot more of the center of your wheel. It looks like a flying saucer. It looks like a type of a dish, okay? So those motors, they don't have as much torque as a geared hub motor. Now, let's talk about torque real quick. It's one of the more specific things, the more technical things, but it's important to know depending on what kind of bike you want to get. So if you're riding a commuter bike, you don't need a whole lot of torque. If you're riding an e-mountain bike and you need to get up a hill, you need more torque. Torque is the power that it's going to have in the motor to get you up a steep hill, for example. Okay, so now the geared hub motors, 750 watt, they'll generally have about 80 Newton meters of torque. Newton meters is how they measure torque. So an e-mountain bike like this with a 750 watt motor, 80 Newton meters. If you had a 750 watt direct drive gearless motor on that bike, you're going to get about half the torque. Now, if you go to a mid-drive, say this was 750 watt mid-drive motor, you're going to get 50% more torque. So instead of 80 Nm, this bike at a 750 watt, you're going to get 120 Nm. This bike is 1,000 watt, which delivers 160 Nm, which is pretty amazing. So this bike, using the gears properly, will walk up the steepest of hills like it's nothing. Okay, so we have mid-drive or a hub motor. Then you have geared or gearless, direct drive. And then it depends on what you want to do with your bike as far as which one you want to get. Now, how big are the motors? They go from, generally, they'll go from 250 watts to 1,000 watts plus. Okay, so if you have a commuter bike, it's kind of like the old school Schwinn you used to ride. You don't need a giant motor. You're going to have 200, 350 watt motor. That's all you really need. Now, you have an e-mountain bike, which are much heavier, you're going to need a minimum, as far as I'm concerned, is 750 watts to get that bike going. And that's with a geared motor. These bikes are heavy. We're going to talk about weight in a little bit. There's a big difference between a commuter and an e-mountain bike. So the motors is where you get your power. The bigger the motor, the more power you get. The more torque, the more power you'll have to get up a hill. Okay? So while we discuss the size of motors and different watts and all that, the brand of motor is something else to consider. And here in the States, in the US, it's either Bafang or non-Bafang motor, right? So you have a Bafang motor, it's going to cost you more. They perform stronger, you go a little faster, and but you're going to pay for that, okay? So the non-Bafang motors, well, I've driven at least 6 of those, maybe 7 of those, and they just don't go as fast as the Bafang motors. They don't have as much torque. They're both rated 80 Nm, but one just doesn't have the torque. And when I ride with other riders who have Bafang motors, I'm always at the back of the pack, right? So what could I do? Pedal harder. That's about it. So Bafang versus non-Bafang. And what's really interesting is some of these bikes out there will say this is our brand of motor, but they have a licensing agreement with Bafang. And so what they do is they have a Bafang motor, they put their name on it. Well, if I'm looking for a Bafang motor, I'm probably not going to buy that bike. So what Johnny says is they should be marketing it as a Bafang motor versus their own. I don't know what else to say about that, but just because it's not a Bafang motor doesn't mean it's not any good. A Vituvia bike I have, SN100. It's a Vituvia motor and it's not licensed through Bafang. That bike has 3,000 miles on it. And most of those miles are going up pretty steep hills and mountains. So even though it's not a Bafang, it'll still work for you. It's worked for me pretty good. It's just a little slower, not as much torque. So there is a trade-off. But if you want a Bafang bike, say 750 watt e-mountain bike, you're going to be looking closer to $3,000. If you get a non-Bafang motor, you pick that bike up for $1,599, something like that. So it's cheaper in price, but sometimes, you're going to get what you pay for and you get a little bit less power. All right. So now let's talk about some of the other aspects of the bike. So when I got my first e-bike, the 2 biggest criteria I had were battery and motor. Now, when it comes to the battery, common theme you see here, more is better, right? So batteries are measured in amp hours. The more amp hours you have, the further you'll be able to ride. It's also relative to the size of the motor and the size of the bike. If you have a commuter bike, a lighter weight bike, you don't need as much amp hours to keep riding that bike. If you got a 250 to a 350 watt motor on a commuter bike, maybe like an 11 amp hour battery is going to be more than you need. Now, if you have a bigger bike, like one of these e-mountain bikes, you're going to want a lot more amp hours. And the first bike I got was 21 amp hours. Like I said, I thought that the battery size was pretty important because the first bike I rode, I ran out of battery. I was throttle happy and I'm zipping all around the trails with the battery. Well, the ride home was 5 miles. I didn't have any battery left and I had to pedal an 80-pound bike and a good part of that ride was going uphill. So if you don't have a big enough battery, you may run out of juice. And that's if you don't use your pedal assist properly. If you go all out throttle, which the first time I got on, that's all I wanted to do, right? But when you use pedal assist, my God, I've gotten over 40 miles with some of these bikes and still had some battery left, all right? So battery is very important. The third most important thing for me when I bought my first bike was the braking system. Okay, so with an e-bike, they're heavier, you're going faster, you're going to want a really good braking system. So you either have mechanical brakes, which are fine for the lighter bikes and the slower bikes. Then you have your hydraulic brakes, which you're going to want for your faster bikes, your e-mountain bikes, okay? Because they're heavy, you're going downhill, you have to be able to stop. So you have hydraulic brakes, which come in 2-piston or 4-piston. More entry-level bikes will have the 2. The higher-end bikes on the heavy e-mountain bikes might have the 4 pistons. Okay, so after the number of pistons in the hydraulics, you want to look at your pads, right? Three basic pads. You have the resin pads, which burn up quicker, and they'll literally burn up if you're going down mountains like I do. And the riders behind me can smell these things. They're like, "Yo, man, your brakes, your brakes stink." All right. Then you have your steel brakes. They last longer, but they tend to squeak a lot. And then in the research I've been doing lately, I've noticed they have ceramic brakes, which are apparently recommended for the e-bikes because of the weight and the speed. So I just got some ceramics in. I'm going to try those out, and I'll be doing a video to talk about those and see how well they perform. Okay, so you have mechanical, you have hydraulic, you have 2-piston, you have 4-piston, and then you have your different types of brake pads. Okay, now the most important part about the brakes on an e-bike is they come with a motor cutoff switch. When you depress the lever on the brake, it cuts the power to the motor, and that's really important. Sometimes you'll be sitting on the bike and you'll just be rolling, or you'll start pedaling just a little bit and this thing will just launch forward. If you're sitting at an intersection, you're waiting for the light to change and you start rolling a little, this bike will literally, the motor will kick in and it'll launch you forward. So just a little safety tip, if you're on an e-bike and you're sitting at an intersection, hold on to that brake lever, keep it depressed, and that'll keep the motor from kicking in, okay? So brakes were very important when it comes to e-bikes, and you want to pay attention to that. Now with e-bikes, there's all different tire sizes, and I'm going to be just general, of course. There's going to be a couple in between here and there in the sizes that I give, but for the most part, you got your 27.5-inch tires, your commuter bikes, your Schwinn, those kind of things. And then you have your 26-inch fat tire bikes, which ironically, nothing about this tire is 26 inches. It's 29 inches total. The rim is only 22.5, so there's nothing about it that's 26, but that's what they call it, 26 by 4 fat tire. Then we also have 29-inch e-mountain bikes. Those are the skinnier tires, and those are about 2 inches, 2 to 3 inches. And then we have the 20-inch tires, which are on your, say, your folding bikes will have 20-inch tires, and those will usually be fat tires, by the way. Okay, so the difference in tires is a big difference in how they handle, how they ride. If you've never ridden a fat tire bike, you might want to try it before you buy it. Okay, so with anything, if you get a chance to try these things, definitely do it. If not, it's hit or miss. And I know a lot of people are going to ask, what about the weight of these bikes? How heavy are they? Well, for example, say your commuter type bikes, your Schwinn type of bike, or even a regular mountain bike, if it's an e-bike, it's going to be the weight of the bike plus the weight of the battery and the weight of the motor. Some of these motors are 10 pounds. Some of these batteries are 11, 12 pounds. So you could be adding 21 pounds just with those two components. All right. So the weight of the bike plus the battery and motor, it's going to make them a little heavier. Now, the commuter type bikes, the lighter weight mountain bikes, e-mountain bikes, they're not too bad as far as the weight. But once you start getting into the e-mountain bikes with the fat tires, now these things, they're heavy. These bikes are anywhere from 70 to 90 pounds. And like I mentioned earlier, you run out of battery and you got a fat tire e-mountain bike, the fat tire is going to make it harder to pedal, right? And then you have no battery and you're trying to push an 80-pound bike up the hill plus the weight of the rider. So it's not always easier being on an e-mountain bike. If you run out of battery and you got a heavy e-mountain bike, yeah, you're going to be putting in some work. Okay. So for the most part, they're not too heavy, but when you get into the bigger ones, the fat tires, yeah, they get up there. And now the folders, you would think the folders are pretty lightweight. Some of the ones that I've seen, they're about 60 pounds, which to me, I thought it was kind of heavy for a folding bike that you're going to have to pick up and put into a trunk or put under your RV or something like that. So they're heavier than regular bikes, but it's manageable. Okay, so now we have just a couple more things to go over and we'll be able to conclude this. Check this out. As for the gears, it's pretty basic. It's the same type of systems that we've known, growing up with our bikes. You could have a single gear, which is not very common. Most of them all have 7-speed. You have 8-speed. I have a bike that has 21 speeds. Okay, so the 21 speeds, I'll have 3 cogs in the front. I'll have 7 in the rear, and I'm going to shift that just like I would a regular bike without a motor. If I'm going up a hill, I'm going to be in the lower speeds. If I'm going fast, I'm going to have to kick it up to the higher gears. All right, so gears, pretty basic stuff. Okay, so in closing, the number of e-bikes out there is mind-boggling. They're all over the place. Now you got two options. One, you could buy from a local shop. Somebody like Rad Rover, they're located all over. And the benefits of a local shop is you're going to get service. If something goes wrong, you bring it to them and they're going to take care of it. But you're going to pay more for that. It's like going to the mall and buying a bike, right? So you'll get service, but you're going to pay for it. Now, if you're on a budget, your other option is online, and this is the direct-to-consumer business model. You go online, you see a picture of a bike, you buy it, they ship it to you from China, okay? So there's pros and cons of that. The biggest con is going to be you're likely to get no service. If there's something wrong with your bike, a lot of these local bike shops don't want to work on these direct-to-consumer business model type of bikes because you didn't buy it from them. Okay, and getting the parts and the systems they have, if they're not Bafang, it's going to be a lot harder for them. So if you get your bike online, you're going to get it a lot cheaper, but you're also going to pay the price in the form of service. You may have to fix it yourself. So if there's something wrong with your bike, they'll send you the part. You're going to have to put it on yourself. So if you're going to get into e-biking and you're going to buy it online, you might want to consider learning how to fix these things yourself. I have a bunch of links on my homepage there, and I did the research. You can click the links and hopefully save you a lot of time. Okay, so if you're going to buy a bike, what I did was create a chart, list all the components, and then you can compare side by side, price, everything. You know, you'll see they have these charts with the components. Even though I did that, I didn't get the bike that I had first on my list, because when I called the company and I had a few questions prior to purchasing it, they wouldn't even take any calls. They're like, we communicate through email only, and that was a US company. And I thought, well, okay, so much for that. Next, I wanted a Bafang motor. I didn't get a Bafang motor because I opted for the biggest battery, but I also got full suspension. So if you're going to get an e-bike, do some research, do some comparisons. If you get a chance to test ride them, that's always the best way to go. And so I hope you liked the video. I hope you got something from it. If you have any questions, shoot me an email, johnnysaysebike@gmail.com. Leave a comment below and click subscribe, click like, check back. I have some more videos. So I hope you liked it. Remember, that's what Johnny says.